Since ancient times, certain doctrines have questioned what we consider to be the fundamental structure of reality. One of these ideas revolves around a figure known to many scholars as the demiurge. In Gnostic schools, this entity is represented as an imperfect creator, born of a tragic deviation from the divine essence itself, a reflection of the fall of Sophia, the personification of sacred wisdom. Unlike the traditional view of a loving and conscious creator, the demiurge was seen as a blind ruler, oblivious to the supreme source from which everything emanates. For Gnostics, this being shaped the universe in a limited and shapeless way, naively believing itself to be in control of everything, when in fact it was only the shadow of something much vaster and more luminous. For those who feel that there are forgotten truths, pieces of the spiritual puzzle that have been purposely left out of official history, this is where many of them begin to fit together. Within this scenario of erased revelations, the female presence in the early centuries of Christianity stands out, a presence that over time has been silenced. One of the most striking names in this context is that of Mary Magdalene. Far from being just one follower among many, some ancient sources describe her as someone who deeply understood Christ's message, perhaps even more than the apostles themselves. Certain manuscripts reveal that she received exclusive direct teachings that placed her in an elevated spiritual position. There are indications that she represented something much greater, a living channel of divine revelations and a symbol of spiritual wisdom. The question that arises is inevitable. Why did the dominant tradition erase this importance? Why was the image of women as prophetesses and guides systematically excluded from the religious imagination? The answer seems to be rooted in the need for control. When the Church began to consolidate itself as an institution, it was necessary to establish a centralized model of spiritual authority. This meant eliminating any doctrine that threatened this structure. As a result, a series of writings considered dangerous were rejected, labeled as misleading, and removed from the eyes of the people. Among them, the Gnostic Gospels suffered severe repression. But the real reason behind this persecution goes beyond the simple defense of dogma. What was at stake was the very function of religious institutions. Gnosticism offered a completely different proposal. It said that the divine was not bound to temples or priests, but within each person. All that was needed was to awaken this inner light. This idea challenged the entire hierarchy that had been built with so much effort. After all, if anyone can access the sacred directly, what is the point of a mediator? The danger for the religious leaders of the time was losing their exclusivity over the truth. It was seeing power slip through their fingers. That is why the Gnostics were persecuted, their books destroyed, their teachers silenced. It was an attempt to erase a path of wisdom that did not submit to established rules. Even so, some seeds resisted the passage of time. For those who see beyond appearances, it is impossible to ignore what these ideas really proposed. Gnosticism did not seek to create yet another set of rituals. It offered a radical view of existence, a way to free the spirit from the illusions of this world and reconnect the soul with its divine origin. Those who followed this path believed that the universe around us is just an illusory layer, a sensory prison. The true world, the one where fulfillment dwells, cannot be seen with the eyes or understood with words. This wisdom cannot be learned from conventional books or formal sermons. It is revealed in moments of deep connection with that which transcends, in the silence of the soul that recognizes itself as part of the divine. This direct experience with truth is what they called Gnosis, a knowledge that does not depend on belief, but on inner recognition. Meanwhile, official Christianity affirmed that creation was good and that the world had been made by a just God. In contrast, the Gnostics saw this physical plane as the result of a flaw, a kind of cosmic prison. For them, salvation did not come through submission to external laws, but through the liberation of the divine spark trapped in matter. This way of looking at life was fueled by many sources. Elements of Greek thought, especially the ideas of Plato, contributed to the concept of a perfect and invisible world, accessible only to the awakened soul. In mystical Judaism, they found echoes of the search for hidden knowledge reserved for those who are ready. And in Eastern traditions, the separation between the physical and the spiritual resonated. Manuscripts such as the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, and the texts discovered at Nag Hammadi are living proof that there was another view of Jesus' teachings, one that emphasized self-knowledge as the key to liberation. In them, Christ is presented not as a figure to be worshipped, but as a teacher who invites each of us to discover the light we carry within. How many times have you felt that there is something you have not been told, a kind of void between what is taught and what your heart intuits as truth? It may be that what has been hidden for so long is now right in front of you. The title may sound strange at first glance, but the forbidden name of Jesus represents just that. Access to knowledge that has been denied, suppressed, and hidden for centuries. And today, that key is within your reach. It is not just another book. It is an invitation to awaken something that has always been within you. You will find the link to this material in the first pinned comment. Among the writings that have stood the test of time and escaped destruction by the early leaders of institutionalized faith, there is one that stands out for its depth and simplicity, the Gospel of Thomas. Unlike the accounts included in the Bible, this document does not follow the structure of a biography or a sequence of events. Instead, it presents a collection of 114 statements attributed to Jesus, many of which lead to reflections on the essence of being and inner awakening. Unlike traditions based on rigid doctrines, these teachings do not impose obligations or rules of conduct. The focus is elsewhere, on rediscovering the truth that each person carries within themselves. In one of the most quoted passages, Jesus states that the kingdom is within each person, and at the same time, around them. It is not confined to structures built by human hands, but reveals itself to those who look within and learn to listen to their own soul. This idea, far from being merely symbolic, reflects a deep Gnostic conviction. The divine dwells within the human being and cannot be limited to temples or rituals. Other texts reinforce this alternative view, among them the Gospel of Mary, attributed to the woman who, according to various ancient sources, understood Jesus' teachings in an incomparable way. In this work, Mary Magdalene appears not as just another follower, but as someone who dialogues with the other disciples on a higher level, directly challenging pre-established ideas about the role of women in spiritual tradition. This representation was disturbing and still is, because it shows that women occupied positions of leadership and wisdom in the early circles of Christianity. The message in this gospel not only confronts male authority, but also reveals a direct spirituality without intermediaries, based on personal revelation. The discovery in 1945 of manuscripts buried in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, offered an even broader glimpse into these forgotten paths. Among them, the so-called Apocryphon of John presents a radically different view of the origin of the universe. According to this text, the material world was created not by a supreme God, but by a lesser deity, disconnected from the true light. This being, identified as the demiurge, acts arrogantly, unaware that his creation is a pale copy of something much more sublime. In this context, Jesus emerges as an emissary of the true divinity, whose mission is not to forgive sins or found a new religion, but to remind humanity of its forgotten divine origin. From this perspective, the Old Testament is not seen as the ultimate revelation, but as a reflection of a system imposed by an entity that desired control. For the Gnostics, the God described there was not the beginning of everything, but a blind ruler who imposed commandments to keep human beings trapped in the physical world. This interpretation appears clearly in texts such as On the Origin of the World, also discovered in Nag Hammadi. There, Yahweh is portrayed as a limited figure who believes he is at the top of creation without realizing that he is only part of a larger mechanism. For these occult traditions, matter is a veil, a prison disguised as reality. Laws, cults, religious obligations. All of these serve only to keep souls distracted, preventing them from remembering where they came from. The Gospel of Judas deepens this critique by revealing a deceitful divine figure who strives to prevent spiritual awakening. In this context, true liberation does not come through obedience, but through the inner recognition of the divine spark. The way the origin of the universe is portrayed also contrasts sharply with the conventional view. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, Genesis is considered the account of the orderly and intentional creation of the cosmos. However, Gnostic texts offer an alternative version, in which the emergence of the world was not a gesture of perfection, but the result of a mistake. Divine wisdom, represented by Sophia, attempts to generate something on her own, but the process spirals out of control and gives rise to the demiurge. From this, the physical plane is formed, not as a gift, but as a trap for the soul. In this reinterpretation, Adam and Eve symbolize the spirit imprisoned in the flesh. When they taste the fruit of knowledge, they do not commit a mistake. They perform an act of rebellion against ignorance. Disobeying the demiurge, in this view, is to begin the process of returning to the divine. Instead of a fall, as the dominant tradition teaches, this episode becomes an awakening. The serpent, far from being a villain, is the bearer of revelation. The tree of knowledge ceases to be a taboo and comes to represent the passage to full consciousness. This reversal completely changes the understanding of the so-called original sin. What was once seen as a reason for guilt and eternal punishment is interpreted here as a chance for liberation. Earthly life, with all its pains and illusions, becomes the testing ground where the soul seeks to rediscover its source. And it is this kind of wisdom that many have tried to bury. Today, however, it is resurfacing, and it may be closer than you think. The forbidden name of Jesus is not just a provocative title, it is an open door to knowledge that has been carefully hidden. An invitation to reclaim what was once torn from your spirit, but you must act. There are few copies available, and this opportunity may disappear at any moment. While traditional doctrines point to a miraculous birth as proof of Jesus' divinity, some Gnostic schools propose another meaning. For them, the virgin birth is not linked to physical purity, but symbolizes the manifestation of light within the darkness of the world. It represents the entrance of a being who was not shaped by the forces of matter, but sent from a higher dimension. In some interpretations, this incarnation is associated with the presence of Sophia, bringing balance and wisdom to the unbalanced creation of the demiurge. In writings considered secret by the early guardians of orthodoxy, the image of Jesus transcends any literal understanding. He was not seen as an ordinary man endowed with virtues, but as the personification of the Logos, the living expression of sacred knowledge. In many of these works, his birth is not a physical event, but a powerful metaphor. The idea of virginity does not refer to the biological, but symbolizes spiritual purity, indicating that his origin was beyond the natural laws imposed by this imperfect world. In the Gospel of Thomas, there is no emphasis on miracles or the circumstances of his arrival on earth. The focus is elsewhere. Jesus as the bearer of knowledge that predates creation itself. He does not appear to found a new religion, but to remind humanity of its true identity. His physical presence was only a temporary reflection of an essence that has always existed. He was not limited to time or flesh. His mission was not linked to rituals, but to the revelation of a truth that liberates. This way of seeing his existence reverses traditional logic. While institutionalized Christianity defends the full union between divinity and humanity in the same body, Gnosticism proposes something more ethereal. Matter for Gnostics is an obstacle, not a divine vehicle. Therefore, the incarnation of Jesus did not occur as a normal birth, but as a projection of eternal light onto a corrupt plane. His role was to ignite the dormant memory of the soul, guiding it beyond visible boundaries. At the root of this belief is the conviction that the physical world, as we know it, is a distorted reality. It is not the product of perfection, but of a flaw. Jesus, then, did not come to redeem the world itself, but to offer a way out. He is not a sacrificial redeemer in the traditional sense, but a messenger from a forgotten origin, one who reveals a path that does not pass through the cross, but through consciousness. Within this understanding, his teachings do not revolve around forgiveness or sin, but around remembrance. The kingdom he spoke of was not a distant place, but a state of being already present within each person. The mission of awakening this knowledge was the true purpose of his coming. He was not sent to bear human guilt, but to reactivate a lost connection between the soul and its eternal source. This divergence becomes even more evident when we look at Jesus' death. Christian tradition places it at the center of salvation, a necessary sacrifice for reconciliation between God and man. However, Gnostic texts give another interpretation. The crucifixion, far from being an act of atonement, is seen as evidence that the spirit cannot be defeated by matter. Jesus, in this reading, knew in advance what would happen and accepted the situation not as a victim, but as a master who shows, with his own body, that matter is not the ultimate reality. Some Gnostic strands go even further. They denied that he really suffered. Physical pain would be an illusion, and his divine essence was never touched. What was hung on the cross was only a shell, a husk with no connection to his true nature. The gesture was not a sacrifice, but a demonstration that the demiurge and his laws have no power over the awakened spirit. The body could die, the light never. Meanwhile, popular tradition celebrates resurrection as the pinnacle of faith. For Gnostics, rebirth does not occur with the reanimation of the body, but with the awakening of consciousness. True resurrection happens when someone, while still alive, breaks the chains of ignorance and recognizes who they really are. Texts such as the Gospel of Philip point to this kind of transformation. There are no open tombs or glorified bodies. There is the end of oblivion. On this path, knowledge is not intellectual, but experiential. It is not about memorizing scriptures, but about rediscovering what has been lost in the silence of the soul. This is Gnosis, a knowledge that cannot be taught with words, but lived in depth. It breaks with the notion of blind faith and replaces belief with inner remembrance. There is no need for mediation. There are no priests between the soul and its origin. Access is direct, although it requires a preparation that few are willing to undertake. This revelation was not open to everyone. The texts make it clear that there is a veil between the ordinary world and this wisdom. Only those who overcome the distractions of matter can understand. That is why so many rejected this knowledge, because it requires more than devotion, it requires transformation. Many of these teachings were passed down discreetly, far from the eyes of the majority. Jesus, in these accounts, acts as a silent teacher, whose words were not understood by all those around him. Most listened with their ears, but few grasped with their souls. The message, then, remains hidden to those who still live under the rule of appearances, and now, centuries later, that same message is emerging again. A fragment of it can be accessed today, but only for a short time. The forbidden name of Jesus is more than a reminder of what has been lost. It is a spark capable of rekindling what you already carry within you. In Gnostic eyes, the world around us is not a reflection of divine perfection, but rather an ingeniously constructed prison. According to this view, material reality was shaped by a lesser and flawed entity known as the demiurge, a being who, out of ignorance, believes himself to be the supreme creator. By imposing his rules and shaping matter according to his own limitations, he keeps human beings away from their true origin. It is as if there were a veil between the soul and its source, and only through hidden knowledge, Gnosis, could this veil be torn. For this reason, the teachings associated with this spiritual path were not freely shared. Many of the texts considered most profound and revealing circulated only among those who demonstrated that they were prepared to understand them. Jesus, from this perspective, appears as a messenger of another order, an emissary of primordial light. He did not come just to talk about laws or reform traditions. His mission was to rekindle what already existed within each being, the spark of true life. More than presenting concepts, his words functioned as keys. He did not offer a set of dogmas, but rather guidelines for each person to find within themselves the way back. For Gnostics, his importance does not lie in physical sacrifice, but in the revelation of truths that had long been erased. Instead of asking for worship, he instigated awakening. Among the most unique aspects of Gnosticism is its appreciation of the feminine principle as an essential part of spirituality. In contrast to traditions that relegated women to secondary roles, Gnostic texts highlight feminine energy as a sacred element, indispensable for understanding the whole. At the top of the celestial hierarchy, the pleroma, a term that designates the fullness of the spiritual world, is inhabited by divine emanations called eons. Some of these emanations are feminine in nature, Sophia being the most notable among them. Her name, which means wisdom, is not merely symbolic. Sophia represents divine intelligence, which, when acting separately from its counterpart, causes a cosmic rupture that triggers all material creation. Her attempt to generate something on her own ends up resulting in the birth of the demiurge. This being, isolated from the rest of the pleroma, is unaware of its origin and, believing itself to be unique, gives shape to the physical universe. The world we know, therefore, is not the result of perfection, but of imbalance. Sophia, however, does not disappear. Her journey, marked by fall and suffering, reflects the trajectory of the human soul itself, which finds itself imprisoned in a world foreign to its essence. Just as she seeks to return to the original light, so too is the human being invited to remember who they really are. This myth, far from being just an ancient story, represents a profound interpretive key. It shows us that the fall is not the end, but the beginning of a process of reconnection. Sophia's pain is not punishment but opportunity. Over the centuries, this understanding has been hidden, and not by chance. By rescuing this vision, many are beginning to realize that the female role has always had an intimate connection with spiritual wisdom. And this is not only manifested on a symbolic level. In practice, Gnostic communities treated women very differently from the patriarchal structures of the time. Instead of being excluded from spiritual decisions, they often took on leadership roles. Within this context, Mary Magdalene stands out. While in the most widely read Gospels she appears as a faithful follower, in Gnostic texts her importance is incomparably greater. In the Gospel of Mary, she is portrayed as someone who understands the Master's teachings more clearly than the other disciples. In several passages, she conveys profound explanations and acts as an advisor to the other followers, including Peter, who shows resistance to her wisdom. This representation is disturbing because it directly challenges the model that has dominated for centuries. Instead of a repentant sinner, Mary is an initiate, a guide, someone who has received the highest revelations directly. Her image has been deliberately transformed throughout history to fit the narrative convenient to the authority of the Church. And she was not the only one. In many ancient texts, other female figures appear as bearers of wisdom and connection to the sacred. The Gospel of Philip, for example, speaks of the spiritual union between the masculine and the feminine as part of the process of returning to the divine. In this view, there is no completeness without balance. Another essential text, Pistis Sophia, delves even deeper into Sophia's journey, detailing her relentless quest for redemption. Her story makes it clear that the spiritual journey is neither linear nor without obstacles. There are moments of doubt, fall, and struggle. But there is also the constant call of the light, insisting that the soul return to its true home. The striking presence of the feminine in these writings did not go unnoticed by the ecclesiastical authorities. As Christianity organized itself as a political institution, it was necessary to establish a hierarchical and controlled model. This meant restricting access to the divine and determining who could speak on behalf of God. In this scenario, Gnostic ideas were too dangerous to be tolerated. In 325, during the Council of Nicaea, a definitive decision was made. Gnostic texts would be considered heretical. Works such as the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, and the Gospel of Judas were excluded from the official canon and their contents condemned to oblivion. The reason was not theological but political. They taught that it was not necessary to resort to the Church to reach God, a direct threat to the growing power of the institution. Over the centuries, this repression intensified. Many of these documents were buried, hidden, or destroyed, but some survived, and little by little their voices are echoing again. In the basements of the Vatican, in the deserts of Egypt, in archaeological discoveries that challenge official history, these fragments of truth are being unearthed. What has been called heresy for so long may actually be the missing piece needed to understand what lies beneath the surface. And what was once reserved for the initiated can now be accessed by those who are ready to see with new eyes. If this content has touched you in any way, please consider supporting our work. Your contribution makes a difference so that we can continue to bring you more content like this. We are deeply grateful to everyone who walks with us on this quest.